Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. The Goblet of Fire is often seen as the bridge between the light-hearted first trilogy and the much darker second half of the saga. This is the point where something truly unprecedented happens. Voldemort returns, and for the first time in the Harry Potter series, a Hogwarts student dies. From this moment on, it's clear things are only going to get more serious. At the heart of the book is the Triwizard Tournament, a dazzling, mysterious and dangerous competition that for the first time showcases magical sports beyond Quidditch. The tournament focuses on logic, bravery and the ability to make decisions under pressure. But beneath this flashy spectacle lies something far more troubling. It was because of this very tournament that Cedric Diggory lost his life. Today, I'll tell you some little-known and astonishing facts about the Triwizard Tournament. Enjoy the video. Number 1. There are a lot of questions about this tournament. The organization of the 1994 tournament raises a storm of confusion. Let's start with the fact that Harry Potter became a champion, a fourth-year student who didn't even put his name in. He wasn't old enough to enter in the first place, and yet the Goblet of Fire spit out his name, and just like that, he was added to the list of participants. Dumbledore claimed there was nothing he could do, referring to an unbreakable magical contract, even though Harry didn't submit his name. Logically, the contract should have applied to the person who fraudulently entered him, Barty Crouch Jr. But the adults chose to look the other way and allowed a teenager, not even of age, to face dragons, dive into a deadly lake, and navigate a maze full of traps and spells. And the questionable decisions didn't stop there. For the second task, the organizers went disturbingly far. They kidnapped the champions' loved ones and hid them in the lake's depths, putting them in real danger. All for the spectacle? Where is the line between a challenge and a genuine threat? And the finale. That turned into outright tragedy. The tournament ended with the death of Cedric Diggory, a young and noble wizard, the only champion who didn't survive. And yet wasn't the whole reason the tournament was shut down in the past to prevent exactly this? Number 2. What happened at the 1792 tournament? Dumbledore, in his opening speech, mentioned that the tournament had been cancelled due to a history of tragic incidents over the centuries. But in truth, it was a specific event that triggered the shutdown, the catastrophe during the 1792 tournament. During one of the tasks, the champions had to deal with a cockatrice, a dangerous magical creature resembling a rooster with a lizard's tail. Things got out of control. The cockatrice broke loose, and the judges trying to stop it were seriously injured. Many people were hurt, and that incident alone led to the conclusion that such a competition could no longer be allowed. For 2 centuries, various attempts were made to revive the tournament, but none were successful. Until 1994. Number 3. In 1994, they decided to restart the tournament. After 200 years, the tournament was brought back. Dumbledore admitted, over the centuries, there have been many attempts to resurrect the tournament, none of which have been successful. But suddenly, influential figures in the magical world decided that 1994 was the perfect time. And that raises the obvious question, was it really the perfect time? Just a year earlier, the wizarding world was thrown into panic by the escape of Sirius Black, the most dangerous Azkaban prisoner. Then in the summer of 1994, the Quidditch World Cup ended in chaos, an attack by Death Eaters and the Dark Mark above the camp. And amidst all that, someone decides to organize a deadly tournament for teenagers. Sure, there was an age restriction, only students over 17 could participate. But as it turned out, that rule could be bypassed. Even worse, once selected, the champions were bound by a magical contract they couldn't refuse, not even at the cost of their own lives. Number 4. What is the Triwizard Tournament? Dumbledore explained that the Triwizard Tournament began around 700 years ago, likely sometime between 1200 and 1300. It was created to foster friendship among the three major wizarding schools of Europe, Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. Each school selected one champion, their most worthy student, and the three would compete for the cup and a hefty cash prize. The tasks tested not only magical skills but also intelligence, courage, and moral strength. It was held every 5 years and, for a time, was a prestigious international event. But over time, the challenges became more dangerous, the number of casualties grew, and the magical community began to question, was it all worth it? Number 5. Who designed the tasks of the 1994 tournament? The tasks weren't born from one mind. A committee stood behind them, ministry officials, school heads, and magical experts. They wanted spectacle, danger, headlines. Something the world won't forget, Ludo Bagman had said, grinning. For the first task, they brought in live dragons. Charlie Weasley, straight from Romania, delivered them personally. 4 breeds, 4 tempers. And Harry, of course, drew the Hungarian horntail, the most vicious of all. Its eyes locked on him before the whistle even blew. The second task came from the depths. The merpeople of the Black Lake were eager to join, not for gold, for fun. They seemed to enjoy the role, Dumbledore later admitted. They guarded the hostages with spears and silent menace. The third task was the most unpredictable. Professor Sprout and Hagrid grew a maze filled with magical threats, but it was Bartemius Crouch Sr., secretly cursed by his son, who oversaw it. No one knew what lived inside by the end, not even the judges. It wasn't a test anymore, it was survival. Number 6. How were the hostages for the second task chosen? The second task began in silence. Under the Black Lake, 4 bodies floated, tied to the cold stone columns. They didn't stir, they didn't breathe, they waited. Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Cho Chang, Gabrielle Delacour. They had been chosen not as volunteers, not as participants, but as bait. The champions were told, "You'll have to find what's most precious to you." But no one ever asked the hostages if they agreed. No permission slips were signed, no parents were told. The judges decided somehow who mattered most to each student. And they were right. Cedric loved Cho. Victor admired Hermione. Fleur lived for her little sister. And Harry, though he never said it aloud, would risk anything for Ron. But what if they'd chosen wrong? What if someone didn't show up in time? The hostages were enchanted, asleep under powerful magic. Dumbledore later assured them they were never in danger, but even Percy Weasley muttered, "It didn't look safe to me." Had Harry been a few minutes slower, Gabrielle would still be under that lake. Had Fleur not panicked, her sister might have drowned. The spell was too deep, the silence too real. The tournament called it a challenge of courage, but to the hostages, it was a gamble with their lives, and no one ever apologized. Number 7. Why did the goblet accept Harry's entry? The goblet of fire burned blue, sparks flew, a slip of parchment shot into the air. Dumbledore caught it. "Harry Potter!" he read aloud. The hall went silent. Harry sat frozen. He hadn't entered. He hadn't even gone near the cup. But the goblet didn't care. The magic was done. Barty Crouch Jr. had fooled it easily. All it took was enchantment. He tricked the goblet into thinking there was a 4th school. Not Hogwarts, not Beauxbatons, not Durmstrang, but a fake, unnamed one. And he submitted Harry's name under that school. The goblet, enchanted only to pick the most worthy from each school, accepted the lie. It spat out a 4th name because it thought it had to. The goblet wasn't intelligent. It followed rules, not reason. It is a very powerful magical object, Dumbledore later explained, but not infallible. There were no protections against deceit, no magical screening to verify identity, no confirmation spell, just a piece of paper, a name, and a blaze of blue flame. And so Harry Potter became a champion in a tournament he never chose, not by merit, not by skill, but because no one thought to ask, what if someone lies? A boy was thrown into deadly tasks not because he was brave, but because the rules weren't made for betrayal. Number 8. The secret role of Barty Crouch Jr. For an entire school year, no one knew. The real Alastair Moody, famed aura, mad eye, paranoid beyond reason, was locked inside a magical trunk. And in his place walked Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater, using Polyjuice Potion to fool everyone. He taught classes, he gave detentions, he drank from a flask every hour, and no one questioned it, not even Dumbledore. Every task in the Triwizard tournament bent toward one goal: getting Harry to the cup. Barty planted the idea of flying in Harry's head. "Play to your strengths, Potter," he said, with that gravelly voice. It worked. The broom helped him beat the dragon. In the second task, it was Barty again, feeding Harry information through Dobby, who brought him gillyweed at the last moment. Nothing was left to chance. Every step was a push toward the graveyard, but no one noticed. Not McGonagall, not Snape, not even the man who prided himself on seeing past masks. Constant vigilance, Moody always said, the real one. But even Dumbledore missed it, because the impostor didn't just wear Moody's face, he played the role so perfectly that the entire school was blind. The security of Hogwarts cracked that year. A murderer roamed the halls, taught defense against the dark arts, and groomed a boy for slaughter. No alarms, no suspicions, just the slow, careful plan of a man who smiled every time Harry followed his lead. Number 9. Why was the tournament not cancelled after Cedric's death? Cedric Diggory died with his wand still in his hand. A flash of green light, a whispered curse, and the maze was no longer a game. When Harry returned with Cedric's body, the crowd cheered until they saw the boy in his arms. Then came silence, and after silence, denial. No one stopped the tournament. No one cancelled the closing ceremony. They handed Harry the cup like it still meant something. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, refused to hear the truth. "He's not back," he snapped at Dumbledore, shaking with fear and pride. Admitting Voldemort's return meant admitting the Ministry had failed to protect its people, admitting the tournament had become a murder trap. So Fudge did what weak leaders do. He lied. He called Cedric's death an accident, a tragic mishap, nothing more. Instead of stopping the show, they finished it. They let the applause drown the grief. They let Rita Skeeter spin her stories. They let the students pack their trunks and go home with nightmares. No official memorial, no day of mourning, just a quiet shuffling away from responsibility. The cup became Harry's, though it had brought him only pain. Not a trophy, but a tombstone in silver and gold. The Ministry gave him nothing but doubt and headlines. And the Triwizard tournament, instead of ending in triumph, ended in the shadow of a boy's death, sealed with a medal and a lie. Number 10. What happened to the tournament afterwards? The Triwizard tournament was never held again. After Cedric Diggory's death, something broke in the magical world. The cheering stopped. The flames of the goblet died down. "Dark and difficult times lie ahead," Dumbledore had said at the end of year feast, his voice heavy with grief. No one clapped, no one smiled. The great experiment of unity through competition had ended with a funeral. There were whispers after the war. After Voldemort fell, some in the Ministry spoke of restoring the old tradition. A new generation, they said, deserved a chance to prove themselves. But others remembered the graveyard. They remembered Cedric's body lying cold beside the cup. Kingsley Shacklebolt, now Minister for Magic, refused to approve it. "We owe our children safety, not spectacle," he declared. Madame Maxime agreed. So did Professor McGonagall. The wounds were still fresh. The idea was buried again. The tournament became legend, but not the kind from fairy tales. It was studied in history of magic alongside goblin rebellions and the giant wars. Students read about the year when 4 champions entered, and only 3 came back. Some asked, could it happen again? McGonagall would answer quietly, "Not while I'm headmistress." The name Triwizard became more caution than celebration. Maybe one day it will return. With rules, with protections, with every spell double-checked, every creature tamed, every cup made safe. But for now, the tournament sleeps. It rests in the shadow of the boy who died holding hands with Harry Potter. And the world remembers no prize is worth a child's life. Number 11. Why did Fleur Delacour struggle with the tasks? Fleur Delacour, the champion from Beauxbatons, was seen by many as a failure. Fans often accused her of weakness, pointing out that she didn't finish the second and third tasks, but that judgment misses the truth. Fleur didn't fall because she was unworthy. She fell because the tournament was never fair to begin with. In the second task, Fleur entered the Black Lake fully prepared, but the water turned against her. Merpeople attacked, vines and weeds wrapped around her legs. "She never got past the Grindylows," said Dumbledore quietly. Fleur panicked. Her little sister Gabrielle was down there, tied beneath the surface. But Fleur couldn't reach her. She had to retreat. Harry, who was never supposed to be there, ended up saving Gabrielle. Some whispered Fleur didn't care. But the truth is this. If Harry hadn't broken the rules and rescued someone who wasn't his, Gabrielle could have drowned. The task wasn't just difficult, it was monstrous. In the third task, Fleur barely had a chance. She entered the maze with courage, but she was taken down almost immediately. No one saw who attacked her. Later it came out. It was Viktor Krum. But it wasn't really Viktor. He was under the Imperious Curse, controlled by Barty Crouch Jr. Fleur didn't lose because she was weak. She was ambushed. Possessed students, cursed spells and twisted traps. None of this was her fault. Fleur's failure was never hers. It belonged to the tournament. The one that promised fairness but delivered chaos. The one that claimed to test courage but instead rewarded blind luck. Fleur was strong. She walked into madness with dignity. And the fact that she didn't win doesn't change the truth. She was never supposed to. Number 12. Viktor Krum, what set him apart from the other champions. Viktor Krum's arrival at Hogwarts was nothing short of theatrical. The famous seeker of the Bulgarian national Quidditch team disembarked from the Durmstrang ship, surrounded by an aura of silent dominance. Among the Durmstrang students, all in heavy fur cloaks and grim expressions, Krum stood out not because of charisma, but because of reputation. He was already a celebrity, a name on chocolate frog cards, a star who had played in the Quidditch World Cup. But for all his fame, Viktor was not a peacock. His demeanor was withdrawn, even sullen. Unlike other participants who mingled, laughed, and exchanged pleasantries, Krum remained a figure of mystery and distance. This wasn't arrogance. It was the weight of expectation, the burden of a boy forced into manhood before his time. His choice as Durmstrang's champion was, on the surface, logical. He was older, stronger, a battle-tested athlete with a record of withstanding pressure. Yet when his name emerged from the goblet of fire, there was no triumphant cheer from him, no broad smile. He accepted his role with the same stoic resignation that characterized his presence. That resignation would define his performance throughout the tournament. Krum wasn't a natural leader like Cedric Diggory, nor did he burn with reckless ambition like Harry Potter. He was, instead, a reluctant symbol of his school's values: strength, endurance, and control. The first task offered a glimpse into Viktor's strategic limitations. Faced with a ferocious Chinese fireball, he did not attempt clever diversion or magical ingenuity. He aimed directly for the eggs, choosing brute force over subtlety. Krum used a conjunctivitis curse, the commentary had noted. The dragon went temporarily blind but crushed some of her real eggs in the process. His method was effective, yes, but also destructive. It reflected his training, a Durmstrang solution to a Hogwarts problem. Efficiency over elegance, victory over finesse. Yet the collateral damage hinted at a deeper flaw, a boy trained to fight, not to adapt. There was something tragic in his silence during the interludes of the tournament. In the Great Hall, at feasts and in the library, Viktor Krum was an island. The other champions socialized, joked, even found kinship in shared danger. Fleur Delacour carried herself with grace and polite detachment, Cedric with generous ease, Harry with reluctant curiosity. Viktor observed. He watched. And only with Hermione did he attempt something resembling genuine connection. This connection puzzled many, enraged a few, and softened none more than Hermione herself. In him she saw something others missed, not just a celebrity, but a young man who had never been allowed to be anything but strong. The Yule Ball revealed this unexpected tenderness. Krum asked Hermione, not out of vanity, but admiration. He had noticed her in the library, alone, focused, indifferent to his fame. For a boy used to adulation, Hermione's unassuming intellect must have seemed like a warm fire in a cold world. Their dance was graceful, his attention sincere. "Victor's more of a physical being," Hermione once noted, hinting not at intimacy, but at his comfort with the tangible over the abstract. He was not fluent in subtlety, not equipped to articulate affection, yet he tried. That effort alone made him different from the boys who ridiculed or ignored her. But love did not shield him from the brutality of the tasks. The second task exposed his greatest vulnerability, not physical weakness, but emotional rigidity. The champions were instructed to retrieve what had been taken from them, their most treasured person. Victor's choice, or rather the task's interpretation, was Hermione. He entered the lake transfigured into a shark, an aggressive transformation that fit his reputation. Yet it backfired. He struggled to free Hermione, his methods again too forceful, too direct. He succeeded, but not elegantly. His choice of form and technique revealed the same pattern. Force first, thinking second. Even underwater he seemed burdened by the same isolation he carried on land. In the third task, Krum's composure cracked. The maze tested not strength, but nerve and judgment. Dark enchantments, shifting paths, creatures of confusion. It was not a battlefield, but a psychological trap. And here, Krum faltered. He fell victim to the imperious curse, cast by a disguised Barty Crouch Jr., who posed as Mad-Eye Moody. Under its influence, Viktor attacked Fleur, a fellow champion. It was a moment that should have ended in disqualification, but the chaos of the task, the urgency of appearances, and the manipulations behind the scenes allowed the act to be buried. Fleur was incapacitated, and Viktor's attack was written off as another misstep in a tournament growing increasingly dangerous. This event marked a turning point. Krum's legacy as a competitor began to crumble. He had not shined in any of the tasks. He had not demonstrated brilliance, only brutality. But what made it more poignant was the realization that he wasn't to blame. The tournament was not built for fairness. It was a spectacle, a political gesture, and a dangerous game played on the backs of teenagers. Viktor Krum was not a hero, nor a villain. He was a product. Durmstrang molded him into a weapon. The Triwizard tournament asked him to be a champion. Neither allowed him to be a boy. What set him apart from others wasn't his fame, but his solitude. Cedric was beloved. Fleur carried national pride. Harry was a symbol of resistance. Krum had no such romanticism. He was feared, admired, even envied, but never embraced. His fame had isolated him long before the tournament. And when he failed to perform at the level expected of a star, the world turned its gaze elsewhere. The wizarding press no longer followed him with the same fervor. His actions, misunderstood or ignored, faded from headlines. Fame, like magic, had its price. Number 13, the Portkey Cup. How did Voldemort trick everyone? The gleaming Triwizard Cup stood atop its pedestal, glinting in the moonlight of the maze, a symbol of glory, a trophy of champions. And yet, behind its shimmer lurked one of the darkest manipulations in Hogwarts history. When Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory grasped the cup together, they were not met with cheers or fireworks. Instead, they were violently pulled through space and time, landing in a graveyard teeming with death. In that one instant, the cup, believed by all to be the final reward, became the doorway to Voldemort's resurrection. It was not merely a trick, it was the ultimate betrayal of trust, a chilling example of how evil can hide in plain sight. The Portkey enchantment, so deceptively simple, had been applied to the Triwizard Cup by none other than Barty Crouch Jr., operating under the disguise of Mad-Eye Moody. This man, a convicted Death Eater who had escaped Azkaban with the help of Polyjuice Potion and a mother willing to die in his place, had infiltrated the school under the very nose of Albus Dumbledore himself. Moody had been a constant presence throughout the tournament, guiding Harry, offering protection, and shaping the outcomes. His manipulation went far deeper than anyone suspected, planting the idea of grabbing the cup together in Harry's mind and engineering the entire event for one moment, Voldemort's return. But how did such an artifact, sitting in full view of the entire Hogwarts faculty, become a cursed object without detection? That is the true horror of this tale. Magical objects are known to be temperamental, dangerous even. The Portkey charm is heavily regulated by the Ministry, particularly in student environments. The fact that no one cast a simple detection charm on the cup, no professor questioned its enchantments, reveals an institutional failure so severe it borders on negligence. It was a Portkey, Dumbledore said grimly in Goblet of Fire. It transported Harry to Voldemort. The transformation of the Triwizard Cup into a trap was not some last-minute spell or a chaotic burst of improvisation. It was methodical. It was strategic. Crouch Jr. had months to execute this plan, operating under the belief that no one would doubt the integrity of the cup. And they didn't. Not once during the course of the tournament did Dumbledore, McGonagall, or even the ever-cautious Snape think to verify that the cup had remained unaltered. The object sat in the maze, the final goal for students risking their lives, and no one thought it necessary to double-check its safety. It is important to remember that Hogwarts was no ordinary school. Its very foundations were layered with enchantments, wards, and spells of protection. The Goblet of Fire itself was protected with age lines and magical boundaries, and yet the cup, the one object that every champion was destined to touch, was left unexamined. The glaring irony is that a polyjuiced impostor, a criminal, was trusted more than the need for basic safety protocols. It was not merely a loophole, it was a crack so wide it swallowed a student whole. Cedric Diggory's death was not just a casualty of war, it was the direct consequence of systemic oversight. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that place had been deemed safe by the very individuals tasked with protecting him. His death wasn't at the hands of a dragon or a mermaid or a magical hedge, it was at the hands of Lord Voldemort, facilitated by a cup that should have been holy, not cursed. Cedric looked to Harry in that moment and said, "We'll take it together," thinking of fairness, of shared glory. That choice, noble in its intent, sealed his fate. From the very beginning, Crouch Jr. maneuvered events to ensure Harry would reach the cup first. He slipped him help during each task. He gave him gillyweed through Neville, suggested he fly with his broom during the dragon task, and used the Imperious Curse on Krum to disable Fleur. Even the path through the maze was manipulated so that Harry would face as few obstacles as possible. "It was I who gave you the book with the information you needed. I planted it on your bedside table," he later confessed, smug and unrepentant. All of it a masterclass in manipulation. All of it sanctioned by the trust of Dumbledore and the Ministry. The Portkey spell, when applied to an object, leaves magical traces. These traces, if inspected by a qualified witch or wizard, can be detected with a simple hominum revelio or similar diagnostic charm. That such spells were never applied to the Triwizard Cup raises difficult questions. Did Dumbledore assume the cup had been secured by the Ministry? Did the judges believe that only they could have access to it? Or was it simple human error, an oversight born of pride, distraction, or misplaced faith? Whatever the cause, the result was fatal. What makes this even more disturbing is that the portkey was not designed to return. Most portkeys are two-way. This one, however, brought them to the graveyard and left them there, abandoned in a ring of tombstones and ash. Harry had to fight for his life, duel Voldemort in a circle of Death Eaters, and cling to Cedric's corpse as he desperately summoned the cup back as a portkey to escape. "Bring my body back," Cedric's echo pleaded. That plea haunts the story, a symbol of innocence devoured by a system too blind to see its own vulnerabilities. Number 14. Why weren't the remaining tasks cancelled? After the incidents. The Triwizard tournament, hailed as a symbol of unity between magical nations, began with roaring excitement and dazzling spectacle. The first task was meant to test courage, a confrontation between champions and dragons. But the Hungarian horntail assigned to Harry Potter did not obey the script. As it burst from its chains, snapping through magical barriers, it surged dangerously close to the audience. The crowd screamed as it hurled itself toward the stands. Ministry officials scrambled, spells flew, no one died, and thus, in the Ministry's view, it was a success. The incident was brushed aside in the official statement. Minor disruption, contained swiftly. Yet beneath the glimmering banners and diplomatic handshakes, cracks began to show. Ludo Bagman smiled too widely, Fudge avoided difficult questions, and Dumbledore's gaze lingered too long on the smoke curling from the dragon's lair. The tournament had begun, and it was already slipping from control. What should have been a moment of reconsideration turned into a public relations maneuver. The tournament, after all, was more than a game. It was an agreement, an international event designed to heal old wounds and foster collaboration between Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and Hogwarts. To cancel it would have been to admit failure. Cornelius Fudge, ever alert to the press and the international wizarding community, could not allow that. "Do you think we'll let a lizard ruin months of diplomacy?" he was overheard muttering. When journalists questioned the safety protocols, he assured them, "The situation is well under control. Our champions are in good hands." He did not mention how close they'd come to disaster. The tournament continued, not because it was safe, but because it was expected. The second task should have been the final straw. Champions were told they would rescue something they would sorely miss. No one explained that the something would be human beings, friends, siblings, lovers, placed in an enchanted sleep at the bottom of the Black Lake. When Harry surfaced, with not just Ron, but also Gabrielle Delacour, Fleur's sister, he was penalized for exceeding the task. Yet what else was he to do? Fleur had been attacked by Grindylows and failed to complete the task. If Harry had not acted as he did, Gabrielle could have drowned. "Madame." Maxime was furious, though she said little. Karkaroff barked about favoritism, but the real concern was unspoken. What if something had gone wrong with the enchantment? What if a hostage hadn't woken? Dumbledore insisted that they had been never truly in danger, but even his words, quoted in the Daily Prophet, sounded hollow. The audience had begun to murmur, uneasy. Behind the scenes, alarms had been raised. The Aura office sent representatives to observe the final task. The Department of Magical Games and Sports revised their internal risk assessments, but the tournament was now a political beast of its own. Viktor Krum, the pride of Durmstrang, had already drawn media attention and fanfare from across Europe. The French ministry had invested heavily in Beauxbaton's performance. And Hogwarts, well, Hogwarts had a fourth champion no one could explain. Harry Potter's name, entered by an unknown hand, was an embarrassment no one wished to examine too closely. "We'll investigate after the tournament ends," Fudge told Rita Skeeter. He meant, not now, not when it's inconvenient. The third task was cloaked in hedges and illusion. A maze designed to disorient and test endurance. But again, danger spiraled beyond control. Viktor Krum, placed under the Imperious Curse, attacked Cedric Diggory. Harry and Cedric were both nearly devoured by a monstrous, blast-ended Scroot, Magical creatures roamed unpredictably, spells misfired, and the maze itself seemed alive. Still, none of this compared to what happened at its heart. The Triwizard Cup was a portkey. Cedric was murdered. Harry returned, clutching his body, screaming in agony, covered in blood, and speaking of Voldemort's return. And still, the tournament was not declared a failure. Why? Because admitting failure would require accountability. The death of Cedric Diggory was mourned, yes, but Fudge immediately denied the cause. He was confused, traumatized, he said, of Harry's testimony. The body of Cedric was quietly returned to his family. The words Triwizard Cup were not mentioned in the press release. The phrase unfortunate accident was used. Dumbledore's attempts to spread the truth were met with hostility. There is no evidence you know who has returned, Fudge stated firmly. In reality, he feared what that truth would demand: war, instability, panic. Far easier to continue the fiction of control. The adults, all of them, had played a role. Dumbledore tried, yes, to protect the students, but even he was bound by the tournament's magically binding contract. "You are, alas, obliged to compete," he told Harry. The Goblet of Fire had made its choice, but it was not a conscious being. Someone had manipulated it. Someone had turned a diplomatic spectacle into a trap. And yet no one stopped the show. The tasks were like dominoes falling, each one more dangerous than the last, and the authorities simply watched, mouths open, hands tied. Madame Maxime, for all her grace, chose loyalty to her country over confrontation. Karkaroff, once the threat grew too real, abandoned the tournament entirely and fled. And Bagman? He disappeared from public life soon after, rumors of gambling debts and collusion swirling in the shadows. The only ones who had truly risked anything were the students themselves, children, placed on a stage for the entertainment and pride of their elders. Each challenge was applauded, each injury was dismissed. Even the death of a 17-year-old was not enough to pierce the veil of denial. What the audience didn't see was the desperation in the teachers' lounge, the whispers in Dumbledore's office, the heated debates in the ministry's corridors. McGonagall reportedly demanded the tournament be ended after the second task. "This is madness," she said. "We are gambling with children's lives." But her voice was lost among louder ones, voices talking about international relations, public perception, and magical contracts. It was too late to stop. The wheel had been set in motion, and no one dared jam a stick in its spokes. Number 15, the tournament as a reflection of the magical society. In the golden torchlight of the great hall, as goblets clinked and laughter echoed, few could sense the deeper currents flowing beneath the spectacle. The Triwizard Tournament of 1994, revived with grand fanfare, was not simply a competition. It became a mirror held up to the face of the magical world, reflecting all its pride, blindness, and decay. While students cheered and the Daily Prophet glorified the event, the truth slipped by unnoticed. Beneath the surface shimmered the apathy of an outdated institution and a society unwilling to acknowledge the storm on the horizon. The Ministry of Magic, under the leadership of Cornelius Fudge, embraced the tournament with open arms, not out of noble intent, but from a desire to distract, to dazzle, to control the narrative. They needed to demonstrate power, stability, and unity among magical nations. Hosting a tournament long outlawed for its danger was paradoxically seen as a sign of peace. As Barty Crouch Sr. stood grim and cold beside Ludo Bagman's ever-grinning face, it became clear this was about image. "We are not threatened," they seemed to proclaim with every announcement. "We are thriving." But in their attempt to polish the facade, they ignored the rot beneath. Their blindness would cost lives. Dumbledore, whose voice once silenced a room and whose eyes had peered through the veils of many lies, allowed the tournament to happen. He believed perhaps in giving young witches and wizards the chance to forge bonds across borders, to test courage and strength, but he, too, was drawn into the machinery. The goblet of fire, enchanted to accept only 3 champions, was tricked. Harry Potter's name was spat out, a 4th underage competitor, and Dumbledore, instead of halting the charade, let it proceed. Rules bound his hands, or so he claimed. But rules can be broken, and must be, when lives hang in the balance. His hesitation was the first domino to fall. And what of the champions themselves? Cedric Diggory, Fleur Delacour, Viktor Krum, students drawn into a spectacle crafted for political theatre. They were hailed as heroes, dressed in gold and cheered like gladiators, yet no one asked what they feared, what they risked, what they stood to lose. Cedric, noble and kind, was thrust into a role he never sought, not just Hogwarts champion, but a symbol of fair play. His death, when it came in the dark silence of a graveyard far from home, was not the failure of the tournament. It was its logical conclusion. "Kill the spare," whispered Voldemort, and with those words, the illusion shattered. Every task revealed another facet of the society that built it. In the first task, dragons were chained for entertainment, their rage provoked for the amusement of the crowd. Children faced death, and yet parents applauded from the stands. What kind of world places spectacle above safety? The second task submerged students in the icy depths of the Black Lake, where merpeople watched silently as hostages, friends, siblings, lovers, floated motionless, chained as prizes to be rescued. And in the third task, a maze filled with enchantments tested not just skill, but sanity. But even then the Ministry watched with satisfaction, smiling, blind to the traps they themselves had missed. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Alastair Moody, roamed Hogwarts freely. That a Death Eater could infiltrate the school, manipulate the tournament, and guide Harry toward a death trap. This was not simply a breach of security, it was a symptom of the times. The Ministry was so obsessed with controlling perception that they ignored reality. When Crouch Sr. began to lose control, began to sense something deeper was wrong, he vanished, erased from the board like a lost pawn. His madness, his disappearance, was quietly swallowed by the system that once glorified him. The Triwizard tournament, once banned due to the deaths it caused, was brought back with a promise of safety. New regulations, tighter control, ministry oversight, none of it mattered. Cedric Diggory still died. That truth remains unalterable. It did not matter that he was talented or beloved or careful. The structure itself was flawed, built to serve pride, not people. The maze did not kill him. The rules did not save him. The society that allowed the tournament to proceed, the ministry that demanded it, the school that accepted it, the world that cheered it, was to blame. What did the magical world learn from this? Not much at first. Fudge refused to believe Voldemort had returned. He stood in front of Dumbledore and Harry, pale and sweating, and dismissed the truth as hysteria. "He's not back," Fudge insisted, fearing what acknowledgement would demand. If Voldemort had returned, then everything, the tournament, the safety, the unity, was a lie, and Fudge, more than anyone, could not afford that truth. He needed the world to stay asleep. The crowd in the stands applauded as Cedric walked into the maze. They clapped when the champions dived into the lake. They gasped when Harry soared past the dragon. They played their role in the performance, never questioning what it meant to cheer for danger disguised as glory. What they witnessed was not bravery, it was a sacrifice demanded by a complacent world. They saw their children bleed and clapped harder. They called it tradition, they called it honor. But none of them stood with Amos Diggory when he screamed over his son's body. The Death Eaters who returned that night in the graveyard did not see the tournament as sacred. To them, it was merely a tool. Voldemort used it to return, to draw Harry to him, to kill a symbol of Hogwarts. And it worked. Cedric died. Harry returned broken, bleeding, holding a corpse. "He's back," Harry said, but the world wasn't ready to listen. Only those who had already suffered believed him. Grief became the proof of truth. The spectacle was over, but the damage was done. The Triwizard Cup, once a shining symbol, became a portkey to death. Its glow, which once drew gasps of joy, now held horror. The trophy had been corrupted, not by magic, but by purpose, and that purpose had always been corrupt, to turn youth into warriors, to entertain through suffering, to polish the brass on a sinking ship. This was not the tournament of old, not a relic of medieval contests reborn in modern robes. It was a desperate lie, and Dumbledore knew it. In the aftermath, standing before the school, he spoke of Cedric's death without ceremony. Remember Cedric. Remember, if the time should come, when you have to make a choice between what is right and what is easy. His words were a reckoning, but they came too late. The truth is, the tournament had never been about friendship. It had always been about politics. The presence of foreign schools, Durmstrang and Beauxbatons, was meant to signify unity. But beneath the smiles, distrust festered. Karkaroff, a known Death-Eater, led Durmstrang. Madame Maxime was treated with suspicion and condescension. The atmosphere was not one of alliance, but of surveillance. The magical world did not come together. It pretended to. Even the students, swept up in gossip and glamour, reflected the same blindness. Rita Skeeter wrote stories of romantic rivalries, jealousy, and scandal. The Daily Prophet prioritized sensation over substance, the truth that someone had manipulated the goblet, that a killer walked the halls, was buried under headlines about Hermione's love life. The press, like the ministry, served distraction. They all did. The final moments of the tournament, when Cedric and Harry touched the cup together, should have been a triumph of unity. Two champions sharing victory, two schools joined by respect. But the cup did not bring them home, it brought them to the dead. In that instant every illusion shattered, and in its place stood a horror the magical world refused to name. It was not Voldemort who corrupted the tournament. He merely used what was already broken. The true enemy was comfort, complacency, the belief that old traditions were sacred, that danger could be sanitized, that children could be offered up as symbols without consequence. The tournament became a warning, not of dark magic, but of the darkness tolerated by polite society. Harry returned with a message. Voldemort lives, Cedric is dead, the tournament is over. But the magical world turned away, unwilling to believe a truth not printed in gold. They clung to their dreams, their rituals, their lies. Only when more died, only when the war began in earnest, did they finally wake. The tournament did not unify, it divided, it did not inspire, it exposed, and in its ruins a new generation began to see the cracks in their world. The students who watched Cedric die, who saw Harry weep, would remember. They would carry that memory forward, and one day they would rise, not to cheer, but to change. In the end, the Triwizard tournament was not about dragons or glory or magical feats. It was about blindness, and who would dare open their eyes? Number 16. Why were there no checks for potions and spells in the tournament? Of all the magical competitions chronicled in wizarding history, none has ever matched the sheer danger, spectacle, and controversy of the Triwizard tournament. But beneath the dazzling spells, roaring dragons, and glittering trophies lies a troubling reality few ever dare to mention. In the 1994 revival of the tournament, a seemingly small oversight reveals a disturbing truth about the very foundation of magical sportsmanship. The complete absence of magical doping control, no detection spells, no potion screening, no confiscation of enchanted objects, just blind faith in the honesty of teenage wizards during the most dangerous competition Hogwarts had hosted in a century. The tournament was reinstated with much fanfare. Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts, Olympe Maxime, headmistress of Beauxbatons, and Igor Karkaroff, headmaster of Durmstrang, all served as judges. Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch Sr. added a dash of ministry legitimacy. And yet, with all this official oversight, not one among them ordered even the most basic magical scan before any of the 3 tasks. In a world where the Ministry can detect underage magic from miles away, and auras possess spells to reveal cursed objects, it's baffling that no one thought to inspect the competitors' wands, robes, or even eyes for enchantments. This lack of precaution becomes even more scandalous when considering the types of potions that could have been used undetected. Felix Felicis, the famous liquid luck, is explicitly banned from professional sporting events. It grants the drinker an uncanny series of fortunate coincidences, making every decision feel effortless and guided by fate. If a champion had secretly consumed this before the first task, dodging a dragon would have become not only possible, but elegant, even inevitable. And yet, no measures were in place to detect the telltale shimmering eyes or euphoric confidence that often accompany its use. Even more obscure potions could have tilted the scales. Take, for instance, the Draught of the Moon, a rare but potent concoction rumoured to temporarily heighten a wizard's sensitivity to magical creatures, invaluable in the first task involving dragons or the third task's maze full of magical traps. Such a potion could have been smuggled into a robe sleeve or taken hours before the task began. The lack of pre-task inspections made it entirely feasible. For all the showmanship surrounding the Goblet of Fire, the tournament's foundation was built on the shaky assumption that every participant was both honest and uninfluenced. Perhaps the most damning example of this failure lies in the fact that one of the judges, Barty Crouch Jr., masquerading as Mad-Eye Moody, was not even who he claimed to be. The deception lasted the entire school year. If the very staff overseeing the tournament couldn't detect polyjuice potion abuse under their own noses, how could they possibly guarantee that the students were competing fairly? Barty Crouch Jr. didn't just impersonate an aura, he manipulated the Goblet of Fire itself, a magical artifact said to be impartial, into selecting Harry Potter as a 4th champion. This alone should have triggered immediate magical audits of every artifact and individual involved. The Goblet of Fire, for all its legendary reputation, turned out to be astonishingly easy to deceive. Barty Crouch Jr. confounded it with a powerful spell, tricking it into believing Harry belonged to a non-existent 4th school. And no one noticed, not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not even the ever-watchful Severus Snape, who distrusted Moody from day one. The incident revealed a crucial vulnerability. Magical objects, even ancient ones, are not immune to tampering. So why was there no protective enchantment to monitor for external interference? Why was the goblet not sealed in a magically shielded chamber until the selection? During the first task, Viktor Krum faced the Chinese fireball. He used a spell that damaged the dragon's eye, an aggressive maneuver that sparked brief controversy. But again, no one asked whether he'd been aided by an enhancing charm, a spell to improve focus or reaction time, for example. No judge waved a wand to check for residual enchantments. No referee examined his wand for charm traces. In Muggle sports, such negligence would be unthinkable. In magical competitions, it was the norm. The second task raised even more eyebrows. Harry used gillyweed, provided to him by Dobby. But Dobby had stolen it from Snape's private stores, an act that, had it been done by a human competitor, would likely have been grounds for disqualification. And yet no one questioned the sudden appearance of a highly specific water-breathing solution in Harry's possession. Didn't think to check if he had it? A reader might wonder. Didn't scan for it magically? They did not. If Dobby had slipped Harry a vial of Draught of Vigour, which doubles swimming endurance, would anyone have noticed? Worse still was how the maze of the third task was designed. Filled with enchantments, illusions, and magical creatures, it was an environment ripe for exploitation. A simple charm to detect illusion spells could have been hidden on a contestant's robes, giving them a supernatural advantage. Enchanted compasses, amulets to detect movement, even cursed objects to distract other players, all could have been hidden in a pocket. And yet when Harry and Cedric entered the maze, no judge asked to inspect their robes, let alone their mental state. Cedric Diggory's death would later reveal how catastrophic this failure of oversight truly was. The maze, it turned out, was not the end. It was a trap. Harry and Cedric were transported via Portkey and a bewitched Triwizard Cup to a graveyard where Lord Voldemort awaited. That the cup had been tampered with, and no one noticed again, illustrates how profoundly weak the tournament's safeguards were. As Harry later recalled, it was a portkey. It took us both. Not one adult had considered scanning the final prize for enchantments, not even the supposed aura in charge of student safety. The Hogwarts staff were not oblivious to danger. Dumbledore, in particular, had faced Dark Lords and Ministry pressure for decades, but even he failed to mandate basic safety spells. Perhaps his deep belief in personal freedom clouded his judgment. Perhaps the nostalgia for the tournament's past grandeur dulled his usual caution. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. A school year filled with magical recklessness, culminating in a murder and the return of the Dark Lord. In the aftermath, no official inquiry ever publicly addressed the issue of magical cheating or potion control. The Daily Prophet focused on Harry's story and Cedric's death, but failed to dig deeper. No headlines asked, who was ensuring fair play? Or were any champions enhanced? Magical society turned its gaze away, perhaps because the answers were too disturbing. The silence became a second scandal, layered atop the first. Consider for a moment what might have happened if someone like Severus Snape had been placed in charge of anti-cheating enforcement. Known for his paranoia and talent in potion-making, he would have undoubtedly devised tests for Felix Felicis, detection charms for mental enchantments, and methods to scan for cursed objects. Instead, his role was limited to suspicion and sneering glances, while real threats went unaddressed. This raises uncomfortable questions about the cultural norms of the magical world. Is it that cheating with magic is so common it's no longer seen as dishonorable? Or is it that wizards, who value raw power and cleverness, actually see bending the rules as a sign of magical superiority? The tournament might have been designed to reward bravery, but without boundaries it risked rewarding cunning of the darkest kind. Even Fleur Delacour, who struggled in the second and third tasks, might have benefited from a potion or enchanted item, but we'll never know. Perhaps her weaknesses were honest. Perhaps she was the only one who didn't cheat, or perhaps she simply didn't know how. The lack of transparency casts a shadow over every participant's performance. What was real and what was magically enhanced? The idea that teenagers were expected to risk their lives in a tournament without even basic magical scans borders on negligence. But when one of the judges is a Death Eater in disguise and the head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports is a frivolous ex-Quidditch player with a gambling problem, perhaps such negligence was inevitable. It was a good show, said Bagman, utterly missing the point. A show, yeah, but one built on illusion, manipulation, and willful ignorance. That Voldemort exploited these cracks in the tournament's design is not surprising. He relied on secrecy, infiltration, and the magical equivalent of doping the system. What is surprising is that no one closed these cracks after the fact. The next generation of wizards and witches would inherit not just the legend of the tournament, but the lesson that even in the heart of Hogwarts, fairness is an illusion without vigilance. In the end, the 1994 Triwizard Tournament stands not just as a tale of bravery and sacrifice, but as a case study in magical irresponsibility. The absence of potion testing and enchantment detection was not a small oversight. It was the flaw that allowed darkness to walk freely in the light. And for all the spells cast and dragons faced, perhaps the most dangerous thing of all was the blind trust placed in a system that never truly protected its champions. Number 17. How did the tournament affect Harry psychologically? Harry Potter emerged from the maze not as a champion, but as a survivor. What should have been the final act of a thrilling tournament ended with the cold, unmoving body of Cedric Diggory lying on the ground, and Voldemort reborn before Harry's eyes. The trauma etched into that night did not fade when he returned to Hogwarts. Instead, it followed him like a shadow, dark and whispering, infecting every part of his life with fear, guilt, and an understanding that childhood had ended in that graveyard. The Triwizard tournament was supposed to be a test of magical prowess and courage. Instead, it stripped Harry of his innocence and plunged him into psychological isolation that no one around him seemed prepared to address. What made Harry's experience even more unbearable was the cruel paradox of his reality. He had faced something no student should ever witness, much less survive. Yet upon his return, he was offered neither sanctuary nor understanding. The Ministry of Magic, desperate to keep order and deny the truth, launched a campaign to paint him as delusional. Cornelius Fudge, the minister himself, refused to accept Voldemort's return. He dismissed Harry's account not just as false, but dangerous. The Daily Prophet soon followed suit, portraying Harry as unbalanced, attention-seeking, even disturbed. Instead of empathy, the wizarding world fed him suspicion and scorn. This public defamation struck a blow deeper than any curse. Hogwarts, once a haven, no longer felt safe. Fellow students whispered in corridors, eyed him with suspicion, even laughed at him. The Chosen One became a term of mockery. Some, like Draco Malfoy, revelled in his fall from grace. Others, like Seamus Finnegan, once neutral classmates, now questioned his sanity. The dissonance between what Harry knew to be true and how others responded to him built an emotional cage around him. He was alone, not just in his trauma, but in the very truth he carried. Even among friends, Harry found himself more and more detached. Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley believed him, but belief did not mean they could understand. They had not stood over Cedric's corpse. They had not heard Voldemort speak. They had not felt the presence of death clinging to their skin like frost. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, the line reads, "He was seeing things again, hearing things. He was reliving it over and over." This was not hyperbole. It was a quiet descent into post-traumatic stress, one that no professor or guardian truly acknowledged. Dumbledore, the only adult who might have intervened, kept his distance, not out of neglect, but out of strategy. He feared drawing Voldemort's attention more directly to Harry, but to a grieving teenager, this silence felt like abandonment. Dumbledore's famous wisdom could not compensate for the absence of warmth. Harry often sat alone, awake in the Gryffindor common room, staring into the fire as if it might burn away the visions. The phoenix song that once brought him peace could no longer reach him in the night. The psychological consequences of the tournament began to manifest subtly. He startled at loud sounds, had nightmares that left him breathless. He was irritable, prone to snapping at Ron and Hermione without cause. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Rowling writes, he wanted to hit something, maybe even to break something. These bursts of rage weren't random. They were the symptoms of unresolved trauma. His body and mind were reacting to a world that had betrayed his sense of safety. Sleep, once a reprieve, became a torment. Dreams of the graveyard haunted him. The touch of Voldemort's hand, the gleam of the killing curse, the thud of Cedric hitting the earth, all played on loop in the theatre of his mind. There were moments when Harry doubted himself, when the gaslighting from the Ministry made him question whether he had truly seen what he saw. The phrase, "maybe I imagined it," crossed his mind too many times. This erosion of certainty is one of trauma's cruelest tricks, convincing the victim that even their pain is imagined. Yet the tournament's deepest wound was the loss of trust in adults. Before the maze, Harry believed, with some hesitation, that authority figures would protect him. McGonagall, Dumbledore, Hagrid, each had, in their own way, offered him a semblance of stability. But after the events of the Triwizard tournament, he saw the cracks. No one stopped the tournament despite the obvious dangers. No one questioned why a 14-year-old was forced into life-threatening tasks. No one, it seemed, was willing to say, "This boy needs help." This dawning realization that adults could fail, lie, and abandon shattered Harry's worldview. It was a shift from childhood idealism to grim adulthood. His interactions with Professor Moody, who turned out to be Barty Crouch Jr., in disguise, emphasized how easily trust could be manipulated. The man who guided him through the tournament, who seemed to care about his survival, was using him. For a boy who had spent his life searching for mentors, this betrayal was devastating. It taught him a lesson he would carry into every battle afterward: trust no one completely. By the time summer arrived, Harry was a changed boy. The burrow, once a place of joy, could not lift the fog that had settled over him. Mrs. Weasley's kindness, Mr. Weasley's gentle curiosity, they were appreciated but could not reach the part of him locked away. He began to withdraw from others not out of coldness, but self-preservation. His trauma had become a kind of armor, separating him from the warmth of normal life. He no longer laughed as freely. He no longer saw the world in terms of school and games. Everything was war now. Everything was strategy and survival. It is important to note that no counselor, no healer, no mental health figure emerged to support Harry. The wizarding world lacked a psychological safety net. St. Mungo's existed for physical ailments and magical afflictions. But what of the mind? What of the young boy who had faced death and returned? That absence reflects a larger flaw in the magical society, a refusal to confront emotional pain with the same seriousness as physical wounds. Harry was left to mend himself with silence, distraction, and rage. His 5th year at Hogwarts would be shaped by this unspoken suffering. The creation of Dumbledore's army wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was Harry trying to reclaim agency. In teaching others, he found a kind of therapy. When Neville Longbottom cast a successful, stunning spell, Harry felt a flicker of purpose. But even then, the joy was tempered. He had grown used to expecting loss. The memory of Cedric was never far. His name appeared in whispers, in quiet, guilt-ridden reflections. Harry never said it aloud unless prompted. It was too raw. The scar on Harry's forehead began to hurt more frequently after the tournament. It was a physical manifestation of his trauma, yes, but it also symbolized a deeper psychological truth. He was now forever connected to Voldemort. The line between victim and target blurred. He could feel Voldemort's emotions: rage, triumph, cruelty. These weren't just magical connections. They became metaphors for Harry's own emotional instability. The fear that Voldemort was inside him wasn't just literal, it was symbolic. What if the darkness he fought had left a mark on his soul? The psychological fallout of the tournament reached its zenith when Harry experienced visions of Arthur Weasley's attack, his helplessness, his desperation to act, and his fear that he was becoming something monstrous, all traced back to that night in the graveyard. The moment Voldemort returned, Harry's fate changed forever. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He was a weapon, a symbol, and an object of manipulation for forces far greater than himself. Every adult seemed to have an agenda. Every word of praise sounded like strategy. Even Sirius Black, his beloved godfather, could not offer stable support. Their relationship, though full of love, was also tinged with desperation. Sirius wanted Harry to be James, and Harry longed for a father figure who could guide him. But trauma does not allow for simple bonds. Their moments together were always shadowed by the looming war, by the knowledge that peace was temporary. And when Sirius died, it was not just the loss of a loved one, it was the loss of hope. The seed of that pain had been planted the night Cedric died. One cannot overlook the significance of Cedric's death. Cedric represented fairness, decency, and promise. He was a Hufflepuff, kind, just, and brave. His murder was not strategic. It was senseless, casual, and symbolic. Voldemort killed him because he could. And that, above all, haunted Harry. that good people could die simply because they were there. That evil required no reason. It wasn't just about Cedric. It was about the worldview Harry had clung to collapsing under the weight of cruelty. From that moment on, he knew that survival was not guaranteed by goodness. And so, the Triwizard tournament became the gateway between Harry's childhood and the brutal adult world of power, death, and resistance. Every task had built toward that final night, yet no task could have prepared him. The dragons, the mermaids, the maze, they were illusions of danger. The real danger was human. The real threat wore robes and smiled and called itself the Ministry. The real terror wasn't the task itself, but what came after. The aftermath of trauma is often more dangerous than the trauma itself, and Harry was left to face it alone. No spell could undo what had been done. No award, no feast, no kind word could erase the pain of carrying a dead boy's body back from the graveyard. He was there, Harry kept repeating. He was there. But as time passed, fewer people listened. His voice became quieter, more burdened. He stopped trying to convince them. He simply bore the weight year after year. The Triwizard tournament had given him not glory, but ghosts. And those ghosts never truly left. Number 18. How did the schools change after the tournament? Of all the tales that drifted like ash in the wake of the Triwizard tournament, perhaps none were as quietly devastating as the ones that followed the carriages of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang after they left Hogwarts. The grand spectacle that promised unity had instead delivered a coffin draped in black, and while Harry Potter mourned Cedric Diggory under Dumbledore's solemn gaze, the other schools returned home, not in victory, but in shame and silence. Beauxbaton's carriage took to the skies like a wounded bird, while the Durmstrang ship slipped beneath the lake's surface as though retreating into exile. The official ceremonies had concluded, but the true reckoning was only beginning. In France, the whispers began before Fleur Delacour had even returned to her family estate in the Pyrenees. It wasn't about her performance, though that too was dissected with cold precision. It was about her sister. Gabrielle Delacour, barely more than a child, had been placed under water in an enchanted slumber, protected by merpeople and magic, but still vulnerable in the eyes of a nation. How could she allow such a thing? Muttered distant relatives and former professors. The tournament's second task had left Fleur floundering in the lake, unable to reach Gabrielle. It had been Harry Potter, not the elder sister, who had brought her up safely. That fact stuck to Fleur like burrs to velvet, and not even her Veela charm could soften the public judgment. Madame Olympe Maxime, towering in both stature and reputation, found herself besieged by letters from parents, donors, and even the French Ministry of Magic. They questioned her judgment, her priorities, and her decision to enter Beauxbatons into a tournament that, in hindsight, felt more like a battlefield than a celebration. "No amount of diplomatic ties with Dumbledore," wrote one irate mother, "is worth the life of our daughters." In staff meetings behind closed doors, Maxime defended the school's values, its courage, its history of excellence. But the shadow had fallen, and enrollment declined that year for the first time in a decade. Durmstrang's fall from grace was quieter, but no less steep. Igor Karkaroff, already a man with a tarnished past and a sneering distrust of anything not wrapped in fur and war magic, found himself under suspicion not just from outsiders, but from within his own ranks. Viktor Krum, the school's golden boy, had cast the Cruciatus curse on Cedric Diggory during the maze. He was under the Imperius curse, Dumbledore had said, and his word carried weight. But in the Eastern magical circles, where paranoia and pride blended like vodka and fire, such explanations sounded more like excuses. Old alumni of Durmstrang, those who remembered its glory before the rise of Grindelwald, before the stain of Death Eater affiliations, began to distance themselves. Karkaroff's judgment in allowing his best student to be manipulated so easily became a stain on the school's reputation. "We do not teach weakness," said one former instructor in an interview with an Eastern European wizarding periodical, "yet we were shown weak, beaten, humiliated." When Karkaroff later disappeared, hunted by Death Eaters and abandoned by the protections once offered by the ministry, it was seen by many as poetic justice. By the time Durmstrang began the next academic year, they did so under interim leadership, with enrollment down and trust eroded. Inside Hogwarts, the situation festered. The Triwizard Cup had been meant to restore the school's luster in the face of bureaucratic scrutiny and safety concerns that had grown ever since the Chamber of Secrets was opened and a hippogriff attacked a student. Instead, the return of Voldemort during the final task plunged the school into the deepest crisis it had ever faced. Cedric's death, abrupt, unjust, and meaningless, became the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. What had once been a tale of glory became a tragedy etched into the castle's walls. Parents were outraged. They flooded the ministry with letters demanding to know how a student could be murdered during a school-sanctioned event. Amos Diggory, once so proud of his son's selection, led a wave of grief that turned into fury. "They made it sound like an honor," he was quoted as saying in the Daily Prophet. "But my boy died for nothing. Not even his name was on the winner's plaque." Hogwarts headmaster, once viewed as the rock of the magical world, came under intense scrutiny. Dumbledore refused to tell the public the soft lies they wanted to hear. Instead, he spoke the truth about Voldemort's return, and for that, he was vilified. The Ministry of Magic, desperate to suppress panic, began a quiet campaign to discredit not only Dumbledore, but the entire Triwizard tournament. Cornelius Fudge denied Voldemort's return, but could not deny the facts. A student had died, another had been kidnapped and tortured, and 2 foreign delegations had fled Hogwarts without ceremony. The promise of magical unity had ended in magical trauma, and that wound would not heal quickly. Inside the common rooms and corridors of Hogwarts, the mood shifted. Students who had once marveled at Viktor Krum's presence now whispered about what he had done in the maze. Fleur, who had once captivated them with her beauty and grace, now moved like a ghost when her name was mentioned. There were those who blamed Harry Potter, despite the truth. "Every time something happens," whispered a Ravenclaw prefect, "he's at the center of it." Even Ron Weasley, once envious of Harry's fame, now began to understand the price of being at the heart of dark magic. House unity deteriorated. Hufflepuff, in particular, was struck to the core. Cedric had embodied everything they valued: fairness, hard work, loyalty. His death shattered their innocence. There was no song at the next welcoming feast for Hufflepuff, no laughter in the corridors. The Fat Friar, usually the most cheerful of the house ghosts, wore an expression of solemnity that never quite left him. Professor Sprout, who had taught Cedric since his first day, wore a black ribbon on her robes for the remainder of the year. The very grounds of Hogwarts seemed changed. The Forbidden Forest, always ominous, now felt predatory. The Black Lake, scene of the second task, was no longer a place of reflection, but of suspicion. Even the Triwizard Cup, which had been turned into a portkey of death, was hidden away deep in the Department of Mysteries. "It's cursed," whispered one aura. "Not the object itself, what it represents." In the staff room, the discussions grew bitter. McGonagall, fierce and proud, questioned why they had allowed the tournament to continue after the first signs of danger. Hagrid defended the experience as a test of courage, but his voice trembled when he mentioned Harry's name. Snape, cold as ever, said little, but his silence was a rebuke in itself. Dumbledore stood alone, his authority intact, but no longer unquestioned. The burden of truth had isolated him. Across the continent, wizarding schools re-evaluated their practices. Beauxbaton quietly withdrew from all international competitions, for the next 5 years. They increased their focus on elemental magic and healing arts, steering away from anything that could be construed as combative or risky. Fleur graduated with distinction but did not return to teach, despite speculation. Her name remained on the alumni board but without fanfare. Her performance in the tournament was neither praised nor condemned. It was simply forgotten. Durmstrang, in contrast, doubled down on their old ways. After Karkaroff's disappearance, a new headmaster, a former dueling champion named Viktor Krum, took charge. He instituted even stricter entry requirements, and the curriculum grew darker, more curses, more defense, more history of magical warfare. The school's motto, once a line from a classical Bulgarian incantation, was replaced with something new and ominous. Only the strong survive. Many saw this as a direct response to what had happened in the maze. The lesson Durmstrang drew was not about caution, but about power. What few know is that Fleur Delacour, years later, would enter Beauxbatons not as a student, but as a symbol. Her name was whispered among first years as a legend, the girl from the lake. She never spoke publicly of the tournament. Her sister did. In a rare interview with La Gazette Magique, Fleur admitted, "That day shaped who I am. I will never allow beauty or pride to blind me to danger again." She went on to become one of the most effective curse breakers in Gringotts Paris division, refusing all offers to join the ministry or speak at public events. And Harry? He returned to a Hogwarts that no longer felt like home. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort, Dumbledore had said, and the sentence became etched in the minds of those who still doubted. But for Harry, the tournament was a crucible. He had entered it by force, survived it through pain, and emerged with the truth. Yet the cost had been profound, not just for him, but for every student who had watched that glittering dream collapse into horror. The Triwizard tournament was never held again. There were murmurs, of course, ambassadors who wanted to try again, to reclaim what had been lost. But no school had the will to sign the scrolls. The Goblet of Fire, once housed in a place of honor, was locked away. Even the Ministry of Magic, eager to rewrite the past, refused to acknowledge the possibility of another tournament. Years later, when Hermione Granger became Minister for Magic, she was asked in an interview whether she would ever revive the Triwizard tournament. She smiled thinly and replied, "We already saw what happens when we test children like soldiers." Her words were gentle but final, and the wizarding world, still bearing the scars of Cedric's fall, chose to remember, not in triumph, but in warning. Number 19. Why was no one investigating Barty Crouch Jr? Of all the enigmas surrounding the Triwizard tournament, few are as glaringly overlooked and as suspiciously forgotten as the vanishing of Bartemius Crouch Sr. The man who was, on paper, one of the most powerful figures in the wizarding world held the title of head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. He was the official responsible for overseeing the tournament's organization, safety, and legitimacy. Yet by the time the truth emerged, when his son, Barty Crouch Jr., was unmasked as the true orchestrator behind the events leading to Cedric Diggory's death and Voldemort's return, the elder Crouch had all but vanished. Not simply from the grounds of Hogwarts, but from memory itself. It was as though the ministry had sealed him away, not just in a grave, but in silence. This silence is not a coincidence. Crouch Sr.'s involvement in the Triwizard tournament, no matter how compromised, posed a political liability that the Ministry of Magic could not afford to acknowledge. He had been under the Imperious Curse, yes, but that fact alone should have triggered an enormous investigation. The implications were staggering. A top-ranking official of the ministry was being controlled for months by a Death Eater within the very grounds of Hogwarts. He signed official documents. He judged the tasks. He was seen by other ministry officials and Hogwarts staff. And yet no one, not Fudge, not Dumbledore, not the Wizengamot, seemed to have launched any inquiry. The moment of his downfall was quiet, almost too quiet. After weeks of erratic behavior, appearing randomly, speaking in half-finished sentences, disappearing again, Crouch stumbled onto the Hogwarts grounds in a deranged state. He begged to speak to Dumbledore, mumbling incoherent phrases about his son and his guilt. And then he vanished. "Professor," Harry says in Goblet of Fire, "he was talking about Voldemort. He said he'd done something terrible, that he'd let someone do it. He seemed mad." But nothing followed. Not a headline in the Daily Prophet, not a whisper from the Ministry. Only silence. This was not mere neglect, this was calculated erasure. When Dumbledore tried to explain to Cornelius Fudge the true events behind Voldemort's return, he included the tragic and terrifying fate of Crouch Sr. But Fudge, in a chilling show of denial, refused to even consider it. "Crouch may have believed you, but he was out of his mind," Fudge said coldly. "A lunatic." And just like that, the narrative was sealed. Crouch Sr. was dismissed as mentally unstable, his story irrelevant, his death a non-event. There would be no follow-up. And yet the signs were there all along. Crouch's absence at the Yule Ball was noted. Percy Weasley, temporarily promoted to be his assistant, gave excuses on his behalf. Sickness, ministry business, confidential matters. But those were flimsy shields for a man who had once been obsessed with duty. This was a man who had imprisoned his own son in Azkaban. A man who had placed law and order above family, compassion, or mercy. For such a man to simply retreat from his post without explanation should have caused alarm, but it did not, because no one wanted to look too closely. One might argue that the imperious curse absolves him, that he was not responsible for his actions. But this only deepens the scandal. If a senior ministry official can be placed under a dark spell for months without detection, then what does that say about the ministry's defenses? What does it say about its vetting procedures, its oversight, its leadership? In ignoring Crouch's fate, the ministry was not protecting him. They were protecting themselves, because an investigation into his behavior would lead to uncomfortable truths, not least of which was the ministry's own incompetence. And then there's the issue of Hogwarts' security. How did Barty Crouch Jr., an escaped Death Eater, infiltrate the castle, assume the identity of Alastor Moody, and fool the entire staff for an entire school year? The answer lies partly with the elder Crouch. Under the imperious curse, he signed off on key decisions. He approved the appointment of Moody to the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts. He appeared at Hogwarts to observe the tasks, validating the impostor's cover story. But again, no alarms were raised. Dumbledore, who suspected something was wrong, seemed to be the only voice calling for truth. Everyone else, from Fudge to the Board of Governors, seemed to prefer ignorance. It is no accident that Crouch's madness began to surface just as the tournament neared its climax. By the third task, he was visibly unraveling. He was seen wandering the Forbidden Forest. He sent nonsensical letters to the ministry. He vanished for days. His erratic behavior should have resulted in his removal or at least a medical evaluation. Instead, he was left alone, abandoned even by those who claimed to support him. Percy, his ever-eager assistant, dismissed every concern, too intoxicated with ambition to see what was unfolding before his eyes. When Crouch finally broke free of the curse and tried to alert Dumbledore, he was killed by his own son, buried beneath the very earth of the Hogwarts grounds. His death was never publicly acknowledged. There was no funeral, no public memorial, not even a ministry statement. It was as if he had never existed. In a world that prides itself on remembering the fallen, the disappearance of Bartemius Crouch Sr. is a haunting act of collective amnesia. The erasure served a purpose. It allowed the ministry to deny the scale of the infiltration. It enabled Fudge to downplay Voldemort's return. It helped the Daily Prophet frame Dumbledore as a fear-mongering madman, but in doing so, it also destroyed whatever shred of justice Crouch might have received. He was a flawed man, yes, a rigid bureaucrat who once empowered the Dementors and authorized secret executions. But in the end, he was a victim, too, a man enslaved by the very forces he once fought to suppress, and yet no sympathy was offered, only silence. The fact that no official inquiry was opened is the loudest silence of all. The Triwizard tournament ended not just in tragedy, but in scandal. A Hogwarts student was killed, a Death Eater walked the halls disguised as a professor, a ministry official was found dead on the school grounds, and yet the only headline that followed was that Cedric Diggory died in a tragic accident. The rest was buried, literally and metaphorically. It is this erasure that makes Crouch's story so damning, because it reveals that in the wizarding world, truth is not just fragile, it is disposable. Even Dumbledore, who valued truth above all, seemed powerless to change this outcome. He told the students at the final feast, Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort, but he said nothing of Crouch. Perhaps he knew the truth would fall on deaf ears. Perhaps he chose to focus on what could still be saved, but the omission is telling. Crouch's name was already vanishing from the record. The Ministry would make sure it stayed that way. And so the man who had once prosecuted Death Eaters, who had commanded the courtroom with unwavering authority, became an unperson. His fall was too symbolic, too damning. To acknowledge his fate was to acknowledge that the Ministry had failed, that it was vulnerable, penetrable, blind. Better to let him disappear, better to paint him as a madman than to admit he had been a pawn in a much larger game. Yet we must not forget, because Crouch Sr.'s silence is part of a pattern, a system that values image over integrity. When Harry later testifies before the Wizengamot, when Dumbledore forms the Order of the Phoenix in secret, when Voldemort's return becomes undeniable, the seeds of that denial are traced back to the Triwizard tournament, and in the middle of it all lies the body of a man no one dared to name. If we are to judge the Ministry's response to Voldemort's return, we must also judge their silence over Crouch, because his death was not just a tragedy, it was a cover-up, a political maneuver, a lie wrapped in silence, and that perhaps is the darkest magic of all. In the end, the tragedy of Bartemius Crouch Sr. is not only that he was used, discarded, and forgotten, it is that his story contains the very blueprint of the Ministry's failure, a blueprint that no one wanted to read, even when it was etched in blood. Number 20. What if Harry hadn't saved the other hostages? The water was freezing, Harry's limbs were leaden, his breath shallow as he cut through the dark depths of the Black Lake. He had already seen Ron, asleep and drifting gently between the hands of the merpeople. But it wasn't Ron who made Harry hesitate. It was the little girl beside him, Gabrielle Delacour. Her small frame floated beside her sister Fleur's spot, unmoving and vulnerable. Harry had only been told to rescue one. That was the rule, but rules as Harry did. Potter had learned many times before, rarely told the whole story. This moment, often summarized as a footnote to the second task of the Triwizard tournament, is rarely analyzed in depth. Yet it stands as one of the most profound moral pivots in Harry's journey. He was supposed to retrieve his most treasured person, and that person was Ron Weasley. The other champions had their own, Viktor Krum for Hermione Granger, Cedric Diggory for Cho Chang, and Fleur Delacour for Gabrielle, her younger sister. The instructions were clear: one hostage per champion. Anything beyond was discouraged, if not outright forbidden. But Harry, ever the anomaly, disobeyed. When Fleur did not return, when Gabrielle was left alone, Harry made a decision that may have rewritten the course of that day. "I couldn't leave her," he told Dumbledore afterward, and the headmaster, who knew far more than he ever let on, looked at Harry with a warmth that echoed the quiet approval of someone who understood what was truly being tested. Now let us imagine another version. one not dominated by heroics but by adherence. Suppose Harry had done what he was told. Suppose he had looked into the frightened eyes of Gabrielle Delacour and thought, "It's not my problem." Suppose he had turned away. Fleur was out. She had been pulled from the task. Time had run out. In this version, Harry retrieves Ron and swims upward, Gabrielle. Still drifting below, the merpeople had warned them that the hostages were safe. "They are in no danger," Dumbledore had said before the task, but danger is a shifting thing in the magical world. The merpeople were not gentle babysitters. When Harry had tried to take Gabrielle, they had blocked him with sharpened spears and angry clicks in their language. "They do not understand," Dumbledore had later said. But what if they did? What if they were bound not by understanding but by command? It was made clear through the narrative and by the merpeople's behaviour that they were instructed to allow the champions to take only one hostage. This implied a system, a strict adherence to magical contracts and tournament rules. They resisted Harry not because they were cruel, but because they were enforcers. Their presence suggested a protocol that, if broken, could have had dangerous consequences. And yet, Harry broke it. He lingered. He hesitated. He weighed Gabrielle's life against a rule. Fleur was not coming. Gabrielle was alone. When he grabbed her and swam upward with both Ron and the girl, he changed the stakes. He redefined the task. The judges noticed. His score, though lower than Cedric's due to time, included points for moral fibre. Dumbledore praised him. The others applauded him. But what they did not say, at least not aloud, was this: Gabrielle might not have survived. In Fleur's own words, delivered in a panicked tone, "You saved her, even though she was not your hostage." The implication was clear. She hadn't been able to reach Gabrielle in time, and she feared the worst. Had Harry not acted, had he followed the rules, the little girl might have remained there far longer, or not been retrieved at all. And the longer she stayed beneath the lake, the higher the risk. Magic has its limits, and so does the breath in a human chest. There is a romanticized notion that all the hostages were never truly in danger, but this narrative crumbles under scrutiny. The Black Lake was home to Grindylows, merpeople with ambiguous loyalties, and other underwater threats. Even during the task, Harry was attacked, tangled, slowed, and nearly drowned. The merpeople were capable of enforcing harsh boundaries. Their resistance to Harry's second rescue attempt shows that the hostages were not considered sacred or inviolable. They were part of the game, pieces, not people. Dumbledore had told the champions that the hostages would not be harmed, but he was not in the lake. He did not witness the spears, the snarls, or the urgent beat of time as it passed. If Fleur had been incapacitated longer, and if Harry had not intervened, Gabrielle could have suffered. If the merpeople saw that none were coming for her, would they have waited, or would they have let her float there, unrescued, until her fate was sealed by the very rules the task imposed? This becomes more than a speculative question when we look at the behaviour of the other champions. Cedric took Cho and left. Viktor took Hermione and left. None of them seemed interested in who was left behind. Fleur, incapacitated by the Grindylows, was simply unable to act. Only Harry stayed. Only Harry refused to abandon someone, even if she wasn't his. That choice wasn't only brave, it was dangerous. Gabrielle was 8 years old. She was not a Hogwarts student, nor was she equipped to understand the task. Her presence beneath the lake was ceremonial at best, and ethically troubling at worst. Was she aware that she was part of a tournament trial? Did she consent? Could a child of her age be expected to comprehend the stakes of magical performance art disguised as a contest? And if not, then her inclusion becomes a darker matter. She was a prop, a token to test her sister, but when Fleur failed, Gabrielle became a liability. Her safety was no longer a certainty. If Harry had not acted, would someone have gone back for her? Or would she have simply been marked as not retrieved, a note in the record of the second task? The judges, Dumbledore, Karkaroff, Bagman and Madame Maxim, would have had to make a statement. One hostage was not recovered, they might have said. Fleur failed to retrieve hers. But what then? Would they have awarded points as if nothing had happened? Would Fleur have lived with that loss? The tournament, after all, had already seen death. A year later, Cedric would fall. The Triwizard tournament had no guarantee of safety. Harry's decision, made in the murk of the lake and under the pressure of time, saved a life. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. Fleur, upon learning what he had done, threw her arms around him and cried. Her tears were not of gratitude alone, they were of relief. Her sister was alive. The fear that had clenched her heart dissolved because Harry did not follow the rules. That moment, often passed over in favour of flashier scenes, was a moral victory, not a magical one. Harry, who struggled academically, who barely survived each task by the skin of his teeth, demonstrated something none of the other champions did: empathy beyond duty. When faced with a human life and an instruction manual, he chose the life. It is worth noting that the Mer people, despite their resistance, ultimately allowed him to take Gabrielle. They did not attack him, they did not drag her back. In their own way, they too recognized the greater good. Perhaps they were testing more than the champions. Perhaps they too waited to see who would break the game to honor something higher. This act, more than any wand duel or Quidditch match, defined Harry Potter. He was not the best student, he was not the strongest wizard. But when lives hung in the balance, he chose compassion over compliance. That is what made him a true champion. Not the cup, not the cheers, but the quiet act of swimming upward with a child who wasn't his to save. In another version of the story, Gabrielle drowns. The Merpeople realize too late that no one is coming. Fleur is blamed, Dumbledore is saddened, the tournament is stained with the unnecessary loss of a child. In that world, Harry Potter wins nothing. No moral fibre points, no applause, just a clean record and a heavier heart. But in the world we know, he saved her, not because he had to, because he could. And perhaps that is the most powerful kind of magic there is. Number 21, why did the judges score as if they didn't care? Of all the puzzling inconsistencies that stain the memory of the fabled Triwizard tournament, none raises more questions and fewer answers than the scoring system. Supposedly an impartial measure of the champion's courage, cleverness, and magical prowess, the points handed out after each task more closely resembled the erratic whims of circus judges than a legitimate magical standard. Each judge, Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., Albus Dumbledore, Madame Maxim, and Igor Karkaroff, seemed to operate on personal bias, mood, or spectacle. The rules were never publicly discussed, the criteria never clearly defined, and the absurdity became most apparent when compared across the champions' vastly different performances. In the first task, the champions faced dragons, perhaps the most dangerous magical creatures ever introduced into a school competition. Viktor Krum chose to cast a conjunctivitis curse that, while effective in distracting his dragon, also led the enraged beast to smash its own eggs, endangering its offspring. Cedric Diggory was burned and barely escaped with his life. Fleur Delacour was incapacitated before she could reach the egg. Harry Potter, a 14-year-old who had been entered against his will, summoned his firebolt and executed a breathtaking aerial maneuver to outfly a Hungarian horntail. The crowd was electrified, the dragon never touched him, and yet Harry's score was only equal to Krum's, who had technically harmed the dragon's clutch. The book says Harry and Krum both got 40 points, and yet their paths to that score were wildly different. There was no logic, only noise. More curiously, none of the judges felt compelled to justify their scoring to the audience, the champions, or even the school administrators. There was no transparency, no criteria, and no sense of accountability. Ludo Bagman seemed to award scores based on entertainment value, clearly impressed by Harry's flying. Madame Maxime favoured Fleur even when her performance was objectively weaker. But the most blatant case of bias belonged to Igor Karkaroff, who shamelessly skewed his scores to favour Viktor Krum, his own student. During the first task, Karkaroff gave Harry a 4 out of 10, an insult so obvious that even the students booed. Dumbledore notably said nothing. The system's failures became even more evident during the second task, when the champions were instructed to rescue that which they would sorely miss from the depths of the Black Lake. Each champion was told that they had only an hour to return and that the beings submerged were not in real danger. Harry, however, not knowing this, chose to remain underwater long past the hour mark to ensure the safety of all hostages. He saved Ron, but also Fleur Delacour, Fleur's younger sister, who would have drowned had Harry not intervened. It was an act of bravery and moral character, qualities that the tournament supposedly valued. And yet, Harry received a lower score than Cedric Diggory, who rescued only one person and followed instructions to the letter. The book states Harry got 45 points, Cedric got 47. Even Ludo Bagman, ever the showman, docked points for tardiness rather than rewarding compassion. It was Barty Crouch Sr, kickers of all people, who tried to defend Harry's decision, calling it moral courage. But the scorecards told a different story. They reflected not principle, but pageantry. In this warped theatre, risk and decency were secondary to precision and timekeeping. It was as though the judges were more interested in maintaining the illusion of control than honouring the qualities they claimed to seek. This raises the question, was the scoring designed to reflect achievement or simply to maintain a certain narrative? The tournament had to remain competitive after all. If one champion pulled too far ahead, interest would wane. If the underdog gained too much favour, balance had to be restored. The scores seemed to act as a narrative equaliser, not an honest reflection of performance. When Harry did too well, Karkaroff's absurdly low scores pulled him back. When he lagged behind, Bagman's excessive generosity buoyed him forward. The points were not measures, they were props. Throughout the competition, Karkaroff's partiality was not just obvious, it was disgraceful. He routinely awarded top marks to Krum, regardless of performance, and the lowest possible to others. No one challenged him. Not Dumbledore, who surely recognized the bias. Not Maxime, who stood to gain from her own students' elevation. Not Crouch, who seemed increasingly detached. The silence was deafening and telling. Was Karkaroff allowed to manipulate the scores to keep Durmstrang's reputation intact? Or was the tournament's integrity simply never a priority to begin with? The third task made a mockery of the entire system. Set in a giant hedge maze filled with obstacles, the task was designed to test the champion's ability to think clearly in the face of danger, as Dumbledore said. But again, the scoring system dissolved into chaos. There were no judges watching, no spectators, no immediate feedback. Only the final result seemed to matter, and even that was twisted by dark magic. Cedric and Harry reached the cup together, and both were declared winners. But Cedric died moments later, murdered by Peter Pettigrew. How do you score death? How do you weigh that against courage? Even before the tragedy, the idea of scorekeeping had evaporated. There were no points awarded for evading a blast-ended scroot or surviving the Imperious Curse. The system that had pretended to measure merit suddenly vanished. The tournament's framework collapsed under the weight of its own illusion. In the aftermath of Cedric's death, no one asked how the scores would be resolved. No one cared. The audience was no longer watching a contest. They were witnessing horror. And with that, the judges' relevance vanished completely. But this begs a deeper question. Why was no one ever held accountable for the judges' lack of objectivity? Why was Karkaroff not challenged? Why were the rules never clarified or standardized? The Triwizard tournament, supposedly revived to foster international cooperation, functioned more like a rigged political theatre. It reflected alliances, ambitions, and reputations, not excellence. The champions were pawns in a diplomatic game, and the scoring was merely part of the illusion. The tournament's original purpose, dating back centuries, was to promote magical skill, bravery, and cooperation. But in its modern form, it became a reality show, a spectacle that prioritized tension and drama over fairness. Ludo Bagman's commentary during the tasks was not that of a judge, but of an announcer. He hyped the crowd, built suspense, and shifted focus from substance to style. His scores often seemed impulsive, designed to match the mood of the moment rather than any objective metric. Albus Dumbledore, the most powerful wizard in the room and the supposed moral compass of the school, never once called the scoring into question. His silence was not neutral, it was complicit. Perhaps he believed the greater good was to allow the show to go on, or perhaps he was too preoccupied with the rising darkness to care. But by failing to ensure fairness, he allowed injustice to persist. It is Dumbledore who says, "We must all face the choice between what is right and what is easy." And yet, in the tournament, he chose the easy path. Even Madame Maxime, who had every reason to advocate for fairness on behalf of Fleur, did nothing to counter Karkaroff's bias or Bagman's spectacle. She played her role, smiled for the cameras, and nodded as the points were tallied. Her silence echoed the tournament's priorities. Don't upset the structure, don't ruin the illusion, let the game play out, even if the game is rigged. The champions themselves seemed to sense this. Harry never complained, despite the injustice. Cedric tried to help Harry at every step, sensing the imbalance. Fleur remained dignified even when sidelined. And Krum, curiously, seemed uncomfortable with his own favoritism, especially when he realized he was being used as a political symbol. The scoring was never for them. It was for the onlookers, the headlines, and the history books. In the end, what did the points mean? They failed to reflect valor. They failed to capture risk, morality, or consequence. Harry's bravery in saving Gabrielle was penalized. Cedric's honorable sharing of the cup led to his death. Fleur's competence was overshadowed by spectacle. Krum's struggles were masked by inflated scores. The tournament rewarded image, not substance, and the judges, by failing to resist that trend, made themselves irrelevant. The Triwizard tournament was meant to be a test of character, but it became a test of how well one could navigate a rigged system without complaint. The scores were part of the show, like the banners, the announcers, and the dragons. The real victories were moral, not numerical, and the real losses, like Cedric's death, were beyond calculation. When readers look back at the tournament, they remember the dragons, the mermaids, the maze. They remember the thrill, but few recall the numbers. Fewer still ask what they meant. That is the final irony. The points were central to the competition, but meaningless in the end. They were decoration, nothing more, and perhaps that was the point all along. Number 22. Why didn't anyone suspect Moody? Of all the many strange and harrowing episodes in Harry Potter's 4th year at Hogwarts, few are as unnerving in hindsight as the complete failure of the wizarding world to detect an impostor in its midst. Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, one of the most famous and paranoid auras of all time, a man known for his fierce mistrust and obsessive caution, spent an entire school year locked inside a magical trunk. Meanwhile, Barty Crouch Jr., a Death Eater once presumed dead, and long thought imprisoned, assumed his identity with the help of Polyjuice Potion. And no one, not even the likes of Dumbledore or the ever-watchful Hermione Granger, noticed a thing. This staggering oversight seems implausible when laid bare. Mad-Eye Moody, a wizard who literally slept with one eye open and enchanted every spoon and doorknob in his house against intruders, was suddenly cordial, affable, almost chatty. He offered advice to Harry. He appeared at the right moments to give just the right encouragement. He even handed out private lessons in resisting the Imperious Curse, a powerful, forbidden spell. This wasn't just out of character, it was an inversion of Moody's very essence. The real Moody wasn't just mistrustful, He was legendary for his inability to tolerate proximity to anyone or anything unfamiliar. He distrusted his own toast. Yet somehow no one, not McGonagall, not Snape, not Dumbledore, found this transformation worth questioning. Consider this: the Polyjuice potion isn't a subtle concoction. As described in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione brews it in second year, the smell is enough to turn stomachs, and its effect is violent and ungraceful. It was the most disgusting potion Harry had ever tasted, Rowling writes. Barty Crouch Jr. had to consume this brew daily, which required the continuous theft of hair from the real Moody, who was imprisoned in a chest with multiple compartments. Each morning, Barty had to secure the right dosage, dispose of the evidence, and maintain the illusion, all without any member of the Hogwarts staff noticing the pungent scent of rotting cabbage trailing behind him. Did no one in the staff room question the smell? Not even Severus Snape, potions master and lover of rare ingredients. What's even more disconcerting is how Dumbledore, a man famous for his insight into human nature, interacted with the impostor without catching on. The two had fought side by side in the First Wizarding War. Dumbledore had recruited Moody as a key member of the Order of the Phoenix. Surely he would recognize if something was off. In the cadence of his speech, in the flick of his wand, in the paranoia that defined him. But no, Dumbledore, usually a master at seeing beneath the surface, failed to see the mask. One must not overlook Hermione Granger, whose hyper-attentiveness had often saved lives. She noticed when Lupin didn't drink his potion on a full moon. She picked up on Rita Skeeter's animagus form. She managed to deduce Snape's logic puzzle under the trapdoor in first year. Yet when Moody, a man she had only heard of in the darkest stories of war, began behaving like a doting mentor to Harry, she accepted it without hesitation. No questions, no raised eyebrows. She even praised him. "Professor Moody's really clever," she told Harry. The girl who could recite every magical theory from memory never paused to ask why an aura of legendary suspicion was now handing out compliments and life lessons. There is something troubling in the idea that Hogwarts, a fortress of magic with enchanted staircases and sentient paintings, could be so blind to deception. Every portrait in the castle is capable of speech and travel. They observe, they gossip. Not one of them, apparently, reported anything strange. Not one saw Crouch Jr. sneaking into the trunk or mixing polyjuice or behaving oddly in the dead of night. Even the Marauder's map, still in possession of Harry Potter, didn't expose him, though it did identify Barty Crouch Sr. at the edge of the forest. Why then did Harry not consult it more closely? Was the trust in Mad Eye so absolute that no one even entertained the idea of deceit? The fact that no one demanded to see Moody's magical eye, for instance, is remarkable. The real Moody could see through invisibility cloaks, through walls, even through the back of his own head. Barty Crouch Jr., though equipped with the eye, never demonstrated its full range. He peered through doors and muttered about students being late. But the theatrical paranoia never quite aligned with the ruthless, precise awareness of the real Mad Eye. Yet no one, not Flitwick, not Sprout, not even the inquisitive Colin Creevey, ever tested him. We must also examine the security systems at Hogwarts. The Goblet of Fire, a magical artifact protected by the most advanced enchantments available, was tampered with right under Dumbledore's crooked nose. Barty Crouch Jr., posing as Moody, manipulated it to select Harry's name, circumventing every protection Dumbledore himself had placed. Not only does this mean that the impostor had access to high-level wards, but that he understood them better than the wizards who designed them. And still, no alarms were triggered, no investigations were launched. Even Snape, ever suspicious and bitterly territorial, never confronted Moody despite clear provocations. Crouch Jr. repeatedly insinuated that Snape had a dark past. In one scene, he comments, "Professor Snape knows a lot about the dark arts," with a glint that should have set off sirens. Snape, normally so defensive and proud, said nothing. Did he suspect? Did he dismiss it? Or did he too fall for the performance? Then there's the matter of Barty's own behaviour. Moody was never known for kindness, yet the impostor delivered Harry helpful insights, guided him toward victory, and protected him with alarming enthusiasm. He gave Neville Longbottom a book about magical plants, which ultimately helped Harry in the second task. This is the same Moody who would have snarled at Neville for forgetting his wand. The contrast was jarring, but again passed without remark. One could argue that the faculty wanted to believe in change, that they welcomed a gentler Moody, but at what cost? The fake Moody's intervention during the dragon task, his clever manipulation of the pensive discussion, even his subtle nudges during the Yule Ball preparations, all of them pointed not just to manipulation but orchestration. This was no passive disguise. This was a directed campaign to push Harry toward Voldemort. That such a carefully constructed plot went unnoticed for an entire academic year speaks not to the brilliance of Barty Crouch Jr., but to a tragic lapse in collective judgment. Hagrid, too, trusted Moody implicitly. He led him to see the dragons in the forest, assuming his interest was professional. That alone should have been a red flag. Moody was an aura, not a care of magical creatures instructor, yet his presence went unquestioned. It's a reminder that even the kindest hearts, like Hagrid's, are not immune to illusion. Their willingness to believe the best in someone can become their greatest vulnerability. The impostor's final act, kidnapping Harry after the third task, was brazen. He dragged a student out of sight during a panic, across a field filled with teachers, staff, and other students, and no one noticed. Not even McGonagall, who had just moments before been present at the maze, thought to stop him. Only Dumbledore's delayed arrival prevented disaster. When the truth was revealed that the real Moody was locked in a chest all year, the shock was universal. But was it deserved? The very existence of Veritaserum, a truth-telling potion available in Snape's private stores, raises another chilling question. Why was it not used sooner? Why was it only administered after everything fell apart? Crouch Jr. gave up his secrets easily once dosed, but the cost of that delay was immense. Cedric Diggory died. Harry was tortured. Voldemort returned. It's easy, perhaps, to dismiss the oversight as dramatic necessity. Rowling, after all, built a narrative in which deception thrives, but the internal logic of the wizarding world suffers under scrutiny. We are told that magical detection is sophisticated, that Polyjuice Potion is rare and dangerous, that Hogwarts is the safest place in the world, and yet the school failed to notice that one of its staff was not who he claimed to be, even as he brewed dark potions, manipulated sacred objects, and consorted with known Death Eaters. The staff's inaction speaks volumes about institutional complacency. Hogwarts, for all its enchantments, relies heavily on the judgment of individuals, a dangerous model in times of deceit. The illusion of safety was so convincing that no one looked beyond it. The impostor was trusted simply because he wore the face of a trusted man. In a world where truth can be changed with a sip of potion, this is a terrifying reality. In the end, it wasn't magical detection that saved the day. It wasn't Dumbledore's wisdom or Hermione's sharp eyes. It was a mistake. Crouch Jr. waited too long. His obsession with Harry, his need to explain his genius, gave him away. Had he simply disappeared after the third task, his deception might never have been uncovered. The rescue of the real Moody and the subsequent unravelling of the plot were not triumphs of vigilance, they were strokes of luck. The shame lies not in being fooled by a clever enemy. The shame lies in not looking closely enough, in trusting too easily, in assuming that because someone wears a familiar face, they must be safe. The Triwizard tournament was not just a test of courage and skill. It became, tragically, a lesson in the cost of complacency. A boy died, a Dark Lord returned, And for nearly a year the guardians of the magical world, the best and brightest of them, looked the other way. The wizarding world paid a terrible price for that blindness. The fourth year at Hogwarts, in many ways, marked the end of innocence. After that, trust would never come so easily again. Number 23. The tournament as a convenient cover for a conspiracy. The Triwizard tournament was sold to the magical public as a revival of tradition, a noble contest of courage and magical skill. But beneath the roar of dragons and the cheers for champions, something far more sinister was taking shape. While most believed Hogwarts had become a beacon of international magical cooperation, it had in truth become the perfect theatre for a meticulously designed conspiracy. The resurrection of Lord Voldemort was not a chaotic accident, it was a calculated performance, and the tournament was the curtain behind which the actors moved unseen. It is a little-known truth that the Triwizard tournament, for all its spectacle, offered Voldemort the exact conditions he needed. Think about it. 3 headmasters from 3 prestigious schools, dozens of foreign students, ministry representatives, and reporters from the Daily Prophet, all gathering under one enchanted roof. It was a carnival of distraction, a buzzing confusion of agendas, alliances, and expectations. And most importantly, it meant Dumbledore, always so perceptive, had to spread his focus dangerously thin. The deception began before the first name leapt from the goblet of fire. Barty Crouch Jr., posing as Alastor Moody, infiltrated Hogwarts without raising a single alarm. His disguise was flawless, aided by Polyjuice Potion and an obsessive mimicry of Moody's habits. The real Moody was locked in a trunk, mere feet away from where his impersonator taught classes. And not just any classes, he taught defense against the dark arts, a subject loaded with privilege and access. This wasn't infiltration, it was occupation. Crouch did not need to manipulate the entire tournament. He needed only to manipulate one thing, the outcome. The Goblet of Fire, an ancient and powerful magical artifact, was meant to be impartial. But through cunning enchantment, Crouch slipped Harry Potter's name into the goblet under the guise of a 4th school. The goblet accepted it. No one questioned it deeply enough. Not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not Snape. The deception passed as a curiosity, a mistake of a powerful artifact, until it was too late. Why go through the trouble of such an elaborate scheme? Because Voldemort needed Harry, not to kill him, not yet, but to use him. His resurrection required Harry's blood, but how could he acquire it? A direct kidnapping would raise every alarm, a staged disappearance would prompt a search. But a prestigious international event with countless dangers, one where Harry's safety was already a risk by design. That was the loophole Voldemort exploited. The tournament offered isolation, pressure, surveillance disguised as guidance, and, most importantly, controlled access. Each task in the tournament became a carefully placed stone along a path that led to the graveyard in Little Hangleton. The dragons, the Black Lake, the deadly maze, none of these were random. They were rituals of attrition, exhausting Harry, isolating him, testing his instincts while grooming his trust. Crouch, as Moody coached him, nudged him, helped him. It was not kindness, it was orchestration. As Sirius Black later said, "You've been taught how to fight, and now they've trained you to walk where they want you." Crouch placed the Portkey at the center of the maze, disguised as the Triwizard Cup. He manipulated the hedges, the spells, even the very layout of the maze, so that Harry would reach the cup first. It was not chance. Cedric Diggory reaching the cup was an accident. Harry insisted they both take it, never knowing he was delivering another boy to death. Cedric's murder was not Voldemort's plan. It was collateral damage. The prize had always been Harry. The graveyard scene is the crescendo of this deception. Voldemort rises, reborn in blood and bone, and declares the beginning of a new age. But the most chilling part is not his speech. It is the realization that everything, from the goblet to the maze, had been designed to funnel Harry to that exact moment. The boy who survived by accident, Voldemort sneered, "shall die by design." But Harry didn't die. He escaped, and with that escape, the lie began to unravel. What makes this conspiracy even more disturbing is how blind even the sharpest minds at Hogwarts were to it. Severus Snape, a man who prided himself on suspicion, missed the duplicity under his nose. He distrusted Crouch as moody, but chalked it up to the usual rivalry. He never questioned the trunk. He never followed the trails. Even Dumbledore, for all his wisdom, failed to see the strings until the final act had already played out. Perhaps the greatest irony is Rita Skeeter, the intrusive reporter, who hovered around Hogwarts like a vulture. She sensed that something was amiss, but focused her energy on sensational stories about Hermione's love life and Hagrid's heritage. The true story, the infiltration of Hogwarts by a Death Eater and the use of a child as a pawn in a resurrection ritual, escaped her completely. Even she, with her animagus spying, was distracted by the dazzle of the tournament. And the students? They were mesmerized. Foreign guests mingled in the halls. The Yule Ball spun a web of youthful excitement, and the champions became celebrities. Everyone was watching the dragon. No one was watching the shadow behind the dragon. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, J.K. Rowling writes, the maze was growing darker with every step. But that was not just the maze, it was the school itself, inching closer to a darkness it did not recognize until it was too late. The use of the tournament as a smokescreen was brilliant in its cruelty. By embedding the scheme within a structure designed for danger and spectacle, Voldemort ensured that every warning sign would be dismissed as part of the show. When Harry faced the Hungarian Horntail, his injuries were expected. When he nearly drowned in the lake, no one panicked. When the maze swallowed the champions, the silence was planned. It wasn't just manipulation, it was theatre. Consider also the symbolism. The tasks mirrored the journey Voldemort wanted Harry to take. The dragon, a test of courage, the lake, a test of loyalty, the maze, a test of will. These weren't just physical challenges, they were psychological filters. They stripped Harry down to his core, exposing the very traits that Voldemort needed to break or exploit. By the time Harry reached the graveyard, he was not just physically vulnerable, he was mentally primed. The Ministry of Magic, ever concerned with optics, played right into the hands of this scheme. Cornelius Fudge's refusal to believe Harry's account of Voldemort's return wasn't just denial, it was the final act of blindness. The entire tournament had been a stage. The Ministry had been an unwitting co-producer. And when the curtain fell, they chose to pretend the play had never happened. What remains most terrifying is how fragile the truth was. Had Harry died in the graveyard, the world would have continued in ignorance. Voldemort would have returned in secret. Dumbledore might never have discovered Crouch's true identity. The real Alastor Moody could have perished in his trunk. The tournament would have concluded, the goblet retired, and Hogwarts left with only the echo of applause. That's how close the world came to missing it all. The lessons of the Triwizard tournament remain haunting, not because of the dragons or mermaids or cursed hedges, but because of how easily an elaborate lie can hide in plain sight. Harry was never a competitor in a game. He was the final piece in a ritual older and darker than the tournament itself. And yet, almost no one noticed. Dark and difficult times lie ahead, Dumbledore warned. But perhaps the darkest part was already behind them, and they never saw it for what it was. If we examine the aftermath, we see how deeply the deception penetrated. The exposure of Crouch Jr. was not a victory, it was damage control. The real cost was psychological. Trust had been shattered. Hogwarts had been breached. A child had been used, betrayed, and nearly murdered under the watchful eyes of every authority figure in his life. And the magical world shrugged, preferring comfort over truth. Even years later, the implications of that year remain under-discussed. The Triwizard tournament is remembered for its glamour, for its tragedy, for the return of Voldemort, but rarely is it remembered for what it truly was, a Trojan horse, a war plan disguised as entertainment. The magical world was shown a stage, and while they watched the fire and fanfare, the real plot unfolded quietly behind it. It is tempting to view the tournament as an unfortunate coincidence, but the more we look, the more intentional it becomes. Voldemort did not need chaos, he needed predictability. The tournament gave him a timeline, a structure, and a credible excuse to place Harry in mortal danger, and it worked. Every safeguard failed, every authority figure underestimated the threat, every piece moved exactly where it was meant to. What makes this conspiracy especially chilling is how preventable it was. A single moment of deeper suspicion, a single conversation with the real Moody, a single investigation into the goblet's behavior. Any of these might have stopped the plan, but the tournament had become such a spectacle that everyone assumed someone else was watching, and so no one truly was. In the end, the tournament did not just resurrect Voldemort, it revealed the blindness of the magical world. It showed how easily darkness can parade through the halls of power if it comes dressed in tradition, spectacle, and ceremony. The lesson is not about vigilance alone, it is about distraction, because in the world of magic, the real danger often isn't in what you see, it's in what you never think to question.